Hello and welcome, everyone. I'm Ryan Heckman, the CEO of Rallyday Partners, and this is the Founders Journey podcast. We'll explore the heart and soul of great founders and their journey to build the company of their dreams. You will learn about new industries and business models while discovering how to apply the founder's mindset to your everyday work and life. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Founders Journey podcast. I'm your host, Ryan Heckman. And I'm really excited about the next hour or so with our guest, Keith Sousa. Keith is a youth psychologist specializing in a discipline called behavioral psychology. Keith has been working forever in this field, both within school districts as well as in his private practice. Within the Colorado market, widely considered to be sort of a Jedi in this field. Keith and I were introduced to one another by a mutual friend, had a call that was supposed to be an hour, ended up being like an hour and a half. And I immediately thought to myself, we need to share this brilliant professional with the Rallyday community. Kind of three core reasons. One, we find that a lot of founders out there, frankly, just have a lot of regrets around the way they were able to balance or didn't balance their crazy work life with being an exceptional parent. Never heard once from a founder, boy, I did a great job as a parent when I was building this company. So I have a lot of purpose around talking about that. Secondly, a lot of founders that we meet that are talking about transacting with Rallyday and forming a partnership and thinking about their futures want to include in their second chapter or second mountain, as it's called sometimes, an opportunity to have a more balanced life and show up better for their families. And we want to honor that. And I think Keith is going to help us there with some skills and such. And then the third thing is that I think I personally have had challenges here. And in my brief time with Keith, he shared some like technical skills, like some ways that I could become a better parent. And he was really passionate about saying something like, Ryan, it's never too late to be a great parent. It made me feel great, maybe a new beginning. And I really want to share that with our community here at Rallyday. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to Keith Sousa. Keith, thank you so much for being here, particularly given how busy you are. Super excited and honored to have you on our podcast.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Why don't you start with what youth psychology is? I also understand you're a behaviorist, which I don't know anything about. So maybe you could start with a little bit of background on what you do, how you do it, and maybe a little bit of why you're in the field that you are.
Absolutely. Thank you. The parameters are wide in that field. That's a pretty wide umbrella for youth psychology. And our practice, we really focus a lot on students and clients with anxiety, depression, symptoms and signs of autism, and any kind of challenge that they might be facing. And sometimes people take a variety of different approaches, and our team is definitely very eclectic in that approach. And we do definitely focus on a family component. And when we think about young kids and change, we're looking at a family systems piece as well. Ideally, that change is taking place at the systems level with parents and the client themselves. Oftentimes, people go into a therapist's office, door closes, client comes out 60 minutes later, and that's it. Our approach is, if the client's comfortable, depending on their age, we want parents to be involved and know what we're working on, because as we're developing skills, it helps to have those open lines of communication so we're all facing in the same direction. The behaviors piece, I'm a behavior specialist by trade, and that overlays into our therapy by taking a look at what are the different functions of behavior. Behavior tends to communicate something and serves a purpose of some kind. And sometimes people are meeting those needs in a very adaptive way. And sometimes people are meeting those needs in a maladaptive way. And when people are meeting those needs in a maladaptive way, part of the behaviorist role is to unpack that and figure out, okay, what's setting us up to be more sensitive to those antecedents, triggers, or evocative cues? And then how do we manipulate some of those antecedents? And then how do we change the outcome so we're meeting that need in a more adaptive way? And so really in our practice, this is an amalgamation. We're compacting all this together and seeing where our clients are and where our families are, and then we go from there.
And you've been doing this for what, 25 years or something like that?
Yeah, about 25 years. I started off as a school psychologist and then moved from school psychology into being a behavior specialist into private practice as a therapist, and now simultaneously do both those things. Our co-owner in our private practice in therapist and a behavior specialist in a large school district.
Well, first of all, thank you for dedicating your life to such an important thing to all of us, which is the future of the youth in our communities. And I thought we could double click on, kind of where we started here, which is obviously there's a spectrum of challenges that all parents face, which we don't want to somehow belittle.
Right.
And, the children's challenges for that matter to varying degrees and for various reasons. But for our audience, I just think we have a unique opportunity to speak to those that are unique to very high performing parents in, let's just say, high pressure jobs.
Yes.
And I kind of made a list of some of the things that I hear out there from other parents and executives that I work with, but in no particular order. These are the ones that are unique, I think,
Sure.
to this demographic. First of all, we all know there's a time thing. When you have a C-suite job or you're a founder, I hear things like I work 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and
Yep.
so there's just maybe more limited time that executives might spend with their children, and there's some regret and shame attached to that to varying degrees that I have found. And there's a reality to that, which is, like you don't invest the time, you don't get the outcome, right? There's all this stuff. So that's a big deal. I find some executives kind of have a blind spot around how hard it is to succeed.
Yes.
Like when you're talented and you're crushing it and you see your 17-year-old having a hard time, getting up out of bed to make it to practice, it's almost like, like an extraterrestrial condition that we have a hard time getting our minds around and think it's just maybe apathy or complacency or, you fill in the blank. So,
Right.
there's just sort of this blind spot that success breeds in this regard. Obviously, wealth has probably done more harm than good in some cases. We've got a coddling effect,
Yeah.
where when you're successful and you create a lot of wealth, you want to give your kids like this high standard of living. And sometimes that can be adverse to some development goals. And so there's a tension there. I think on the youth side, they may have a fear of failure and some expectations that their successful parents have set for them that may feel like a lot of dissonance between where they are and where they think they need to be. And we all know that a really long, narrow bridge over high altitude is a lot scarier than not. And so I hear that a lot. There's this other thing where parents with high pressure jobs may not take care of themselves very much. So their cup is kind of empty. And when they get home, they don't have much to give to their kids. And, there's a lot to unpack there, I'm sure, but it's real. And like when you don't take care of yourself, you're just not as happy. And so sadly, I think a lot of us might give our leftovers, as I've heard it called, to our families instead of the main dish, the entree. We give that to our jobs out of duty and commitment, but just don't have anything left for those that we love. So, I mean, that's a long list, and I don't know how you want to start,
Yeah.
Keith, but
Well, we can kind of take one at a time, and then if you want to just kind of, see all the connective tissue in there and intertwine them, that's okay.
cool. Well, maybe unpack these, and you don't have to do them in order, but whatever ones sort of struck you, please let's maybe dedicate 3 to 5 minutes per or something like that.
Sure. Yeah. Well, I wrote them all down, and they all struck me. Let's start with the first one you mentioned which was time, and you said it, but time and your attention is an investment, and parents can have a hard time at all different levels finding the time to invest in their family and their kids. And kids are very humbling. When you're a high functioning person, you have honed the skills to get results. And, if you're a founder and you're a leader think of all the energy you put into getting to that level. The number of, person hours that go into that are extraordinary. You've surpassed your 10,000 hours for expertise. And then you come into being a parent, and within 24 hours, you're driving a baby home, and you have not put in the 10,000 hours just yet. So the humbling part is that there's a tremendous growth opportunity here. And it's never too late to try and start to be a great parent. And so with the timepiece, this is where I would go back and really ask a founder, some deeper questions. When you're in a board meeting, you're meeting with investors, you're meeting with clients. Are you multitasking, or are you fully invested and present in those meetings? And my hunch is, and you chime in, this is your area of expertise. My hunch is that they're invested, they're present, they are really dialed into what's going on in that moment. And I would say that skill set definitely overlays with parenting, because there's a quality over quantity piece that I think parents can certainly put in. Half paying attention and trying to toggle between email and calls and spending time with your kids for 2 hours is not nearly as good as 45 minutes of dedicated, depending on the age of your kids, whether you're playing on the floor with them and doing what they want to do, or you're sitting down and talking to them or teaching them how to drive. That uninterrupted focused time really pays dividends. And it doesn't need to be an enormous amount of time, but it needs to be time that you're present.
I like that quantity over or quality over quantity, pardon me. And I think that is very helpful. I'm also struck by, kind of like standard making that you're implying here versus also empathy. So there is an empathy attached to the needs of a founder that get pulled in 1,000 ways, like 24 hours a day. But you're also saying, but also, like quality matters, and the way in which you show up with your kids might be as important or more important than the amount of time you're giving them. So that's very helpful. I'm also struck by this like 10,000 hour thing, and just like, I think we get addicted in the workplace. Like if you do a good job in a meeting, you get some pretty quick feedback that's usually very positive, particularly if like you're there with people that report to you, for example.
Yes.
There is no such relationship with your kids. And so like the reinforcement loop is kind of not present at home like it is at work. And like to somehow expect that from our kids is like probably not healthy.
Yeah. And I, to your point, there's more of an intrinsic reward, and you're playing the long game. With parenting, you're planting seeds and helping those germinate over time. And I think a lot of founders could probably overlay a variety of different skills that they have onto parenting. I'm not even remotely at the level of your audience, but I've started a few small businesses here and there. And there's a lot of upfront planning, and you're putting things into place, and you're creating logos and figuring out a marketing strategy. And all that is you're just germinating those seeds. Nothing has really sprouted just yet. And there's some latency between doing that and seeing the end product of a successful business. And parenting is similar for an extended period of time. But if you look back in rears, and this is where I think it's important for parents to take a really good, like 10,000-foot view. Not every moment of the day, you have to be in the present, but to step back and look at the growth and progress that their kids have made. And it can be hard because it's like watching the proverbial grass grow. You're watching it in real time, and it's hard to see that, boy, they've really dialed in their ability to be organized compared to 2 years ago. They are making better social connections. They are making solid choices for themselves. And then, if we can see that can be reinforcing, knowing that we're on the right path.
Thank you. Let's go to the next one, which is like, I don't know what we call this, but this is the successful person with a lot of talent doesn't understand how hard it is to become successful and talented. Like
Right.
that gap.
Yes.
Tell us what your interpretation of that is.
Yeah, I think, that's an interesting one, because I think like you laid the groundwork really nicely, and just talked about the amount of time that goes into being a founder, being an executive, being a high performer. That is a tremendous amount of effort. And it being hard to succeed at parenting, that role is somewhat moving, and it's very ambiguous as to what it means to succeed as a parent. We have to parent the kids we have. And I think that can be hard for people who are great at setting outcomes and directing the ship in that direction. Some of our kids are going to move in a different direction at a different pace, move quickly in some points in their life, move slowly at other points in their life. So, success, we probably have to get down. And this is where I think for someone who wants to be even more informed on parenting, this is where someone might want to kind of get into like the granularity of what are executive functioning skills. That's the development of the prefrontal cortex. And I won't go off on a long diatribe about this, but essentially, as the prefrontal cortex is developing, it starts off as a big spike. It develops right out of the gate, and then it slowly is trailing down, and then it develops a little bit stronger, and then it goes down again, and then it fully kind of develops between like 18 and mid-20s. Those skills are organization, planning, inhibiting responses that aren't healthy for us, initiating hard things, controlling emotions, being organized. And a lot of those skills go into what, a parent might see as success. My child is doing well in this academic subject, they're excelling at this sport, they're showing up on time. And those are intimately tied to those executive functioning skills, which are being built in real time for our kids and ebbing and flowing along the way. And so when we have a good sense of that, we, as the adults and the parents, now we're taking a more thoughtful approach ourselves. And again, going back to the skills that founders have that make them successful, overlaying with parenting, most of your audience probably has a tremendous skill set and structures that they can lean into and default to when they're faced with a challenge. And I would say understanding executive functioning skills would be one thing that would bring us back and keep us in a pretty thoughtful place versus becoming overly emotional and then having that kind of breakdown.
Really well said. I mean, and I know this audience who's listening, they understand this executive skill toolkit that we see on the job and in the people that we work with. And to varying degrees, there's people who are really good at those and some who aren't. And they might be really good technically, but not great on the EQ side. We all know those kind of people, right? And I think it's particularly disturbing for any of us when we see our kids not have some of those things that are so important. And the way you've laid it out is that like it's a journey and it's a biological one, not necessarily a trying or not trying thing, or getting it or not getting it thing, but rather a developmental thing. When they're in their developmental years, and you also said that they don't go in a straight line, like, there's kind of dips and ebbs and flows of quality. What's the right way for a parent to inform those skills and create awareness without being judgy or negative, which is so easy to do, like get out of bed or whatever, right? Like,
yes. Yeah. And this is where we want to identify the challenge and start to figure out, okay, where as a parental unit are we going to put our energy? The temptation is to we're going to address every issue under the sun. And in reality, we probably need to address one or two things. And another model I would really encourage people to dive into would be the collaborative problem-solving model. And that is basically, there are several books on it. Ross Greene is the author. But you're putting behaviors into buckets. And so the first one is like plan A. These are non-negotiables. And these might be safety things. Mom and dad, we've decided that if you're going to do something that is extremely unsafe, it's a non-starter for us. It's not going to happen. We're laying down the law. Then we go over to plan C, and these might be things that are important for us as parents that we want to address, but we're going to table it for now, put it on the back burner until we can kind of have the bandwidth to manage those things. And now we're putting the other things that we want to work on, one or two at a time, in plan B, which is this collaborative problem-solving approach. And at any age, at a developmental level, we can work with our kids on, hey, this is what we're seeing. Hey, I'm noticing that every day I come in and have to get you out of bed, and then you get upset at me, and then I push back on you, and that doesn't seem to be going very well, and it's uncomfortable, and I don't really like it. What are we going to do about it? And then the parent can say, hey, here's the problem for me. I've got to get up. I'm getting up at 5 a.m, doing a quick workout, and then I'm out the door by 6:30, and I'm trying to get you out of bed, and I just don't have the time to devote to this kind of back and forth. what's the problem for you? And then we hear from the teenager and they kind of share what's going on. And then we come up with some collaborative solution that we put into place with fidelity and see where it takes us. And so part of that parenting approach is we have to triage what we're going to work on. Again, we could get into the weeds here and we'll try not to. But then systems theory can kind of take over. We start to just address cleaning up dishes or sitting down for a family dinner or getting out of bed. And then all of a sudden, other parts of the system start to change. And so we take one of those at a time. And if someone doesn't hold up their end of the agreement, whether it's the parent or the child, then we come back and say, hey, you told me you were going to set an alarm and that after one snooze, you're going to get up. And I would give you a reminder and that's not working. What's going on with that? And we keep trying to put the ownership back onto our kids and have some shared kind of responsibility here. Can I tack on one more piece to what you said?
Please.
One other model. So we've kind of talked about executive functioning skills in our kids. We talked about collaborative problem solving as a model. There's another model from the Crisis Prevention Institute, and it's called the Crisis Development Model. And this is a great model where we look at how a crisis develops from someone being at baseline, rational and in control, to a change in behavior, which we call the anxiety stage, to a kind of getting up into questioning and refusal, maybe even some like high-level release behaviors, call that the defensive stage. People can get like unsafe at the risk stage and then eventually calm down to what's called tension reduction. But if parents understand that model, we overlay that with the executive functioning concept, we're seeing that we've got to catch our kids when they're able to access what they do have in their prefrontal cortex at those lower level stages to make any progress. You can start to use that model as a blueprint of, hey, when you do this, I'm going to say this. And we can sit down with our kids and it doesn't take long to do. And now we've got a tool that we're working off of to kind of help with that whole parental structure and changing some of that behavior.
I mean, that model works at work too. I should have.
Yes, it's definitely a human model.
You don't want to bust someone's chops and try to have a developmental conversation in the middle of a crisis or when they're in a bad place. You kind of want to do it in a more thoughtful time when they can be prepared and things are calmer and those kinds of things. I mean, that's really a strong point you're making, Keith, to me, because I think more often than not, as parents, we manage and lead our kids in the moment in which we observe the behavior, as opposed to maybe a more strategic approach later, or, but if you're running and trying to get to work or whatever, and you're going through the craziness of a morning, it just requires a lot of discipline to not address that behavioral concern in the moment and park it for a developmental conversation as opposed to a punitive conversation, which is more likely in the heat of the moment, right?
Right. Absolutely. And the goal isn't to be perfect. The goal is to set an approach that we want to try and put into place. We're identifying our values as a parental unit. We're trying to see if we can have our actions be connected back to those values, setting our intentions, and then creating the structures and putting them into place. And that's not going to happen all the time. And that's totally, I'm in the same boat. I have 3 kids and I've yelled at my kids plenty of times and gotten upset. But we want the scale, if we're thinking on a scale, we want the scale to tip more on the side of us having a thoughtful approach, carving out time for these things, being strategic versus the other side of the scale.
Yeah, thank you. All right, let's go to this one, the whole wealth thing, which, by definition is the epitome of a high-class problem. Okay, so let's just apologize right now for trying to give too much empathy to this issue. However, my own personal story is I grew up with very little and, wanting a lot as a kid that maybe my friends had, and always having resource strife at home. Like the phone bill would come and parents would get into a conversation, an argument about who was on the phone too much or whatever, or we didn't have enough money for this trip or, clothes and stuff like that. And so the minute, I was able to get any amount of wealth, like the first thing I wanted to do with that was give my children a higher quality of life and a higher standard of living. And I think a lot of us are in this boat, which, sounds great. But I do notice that a lot of spoiled kids come from that good place. What's the right way to handle that, in your opinion, Keith?
Yes, certainly my opinion, and definitely not necessarily the right way. But when you said it the first time, it made me think of a quote: "Smooth seas do not make skilled sailors." And first of all, we don't want to, like you're saying, it's a gift for our kids to have access to some of those privileges and resources. So we don't want to pretend like that's necessarily a negative thing. It's what we do with it, though, and how do we want our kids to grow up? And your story is very telling. You didn't grow up with a lot of resources. You worked very hard. So you had to develop those skills over the years that have made you a successful person now and, leading up to this. How do we help our kids do that when they have access to a lot of different resources? How do we help them develop those skills? Are we putting them in contrived situations? Are we letting them manage challenges on their own and then stepping in? And this again is a very thoughtful approach on our end to figure out where are our kids developmentally. And I think that's another model that I would encourage parents to go back to. If anyone's ever had a Psych 101 class, Erik Erikson's psychosocial stages of development, trust versus mistrust, autonomy versus shame and doubt, these are classic things, but they really have stood the test of time. And we want to make sure that we are helping our kids kind of hit these developmental milestones along the way without doing too much for them. And we certainly don't want to see them struggle, and let's take one example of someone struggling in math. Well, if I'm a family of means, I can probably afford a really good tutor and some extra help, and I can make sure that they are able to get to the house or get to that location. That's a great use of resources, right? I've got someone who's struggling. I'm helping them backfill that. They're having to do the work. Versus I've got a lot of positional authority. I'm calling the school and demanding that, the teacher move this grade from a C to a B, and our child is not having to do the work.
I was just going to say, what about just I'll give you the most primitive example. So let's say you're going on a vacation and it's a long flight and you have the means to buy first class tickets. And if it was just you and your wife, you wouldn't even think twice about it. And you're going to do that. And it's family vacation time. I've heard theories of don't do that. Don't fly first, fly coach. That's a good role modeling and saves money. It's good for a lot of wins all over the place.
Yep.
I've even heard of parents where this is crazy, but they sat in first and they said, kids, no, you're in coach. And that's a lesson there. If you work hard, then you get to sit up there. And if you're just a kid and you're, on a vacation with your parents, you sit in coach. I have recently started just all flying in coach, but I regret the way I handled that earlier in my life. What would your field say about the way to give to your kids, kind of the fruits of your labor without stunting their growth?
Right. And this is where I think that the conversations we're having with our kids is really important. And so at the end of that chain, if we're flying in coach or flying in first class, it depends on what the belief system is for our kids behind that. And I think this is where you talked about kids being spoiled at some point. I think where I see the rubber hit the road is when kids believe their parents' resources are their resources, when they believe their parents' success is their success. And I think it's important for founders and leaders to differentiate, this is what I've done, this is what I've built, and now you're on your journey, and I'm here to support you in a lot of different ways, but they're separate journeys. And so if we fly first class, it's certainly okay to say, in your own individual way, hey, we're doing this because this is what we've accomplished, and I've, been able to do this with the resources we have. You might not always be able to do this, so we're going to enjoy it. And then when you are paying for it yourself, you'll have to see. I also think, just to kind of tack onto this, I think it's okay to have a developmentally appropriate level of financial transparency with our kids. That doesn't always take place. I see this a lot in private practice, particularly when kids are getting into high school and college age, where they've kind of lost their way on how expensive a school is or what their parents are willing to do. And I work with a lot of high-performing parents. So a lot of them do have the resources to just say, oh, it's basically a blank check. If you get into USC or Brown, just go ahead. This is going to happen. But I think it's okay to kind of share like, this is the cost of that school. This is, here's the cost benefit. If you were paying for this on your own and took a student loan at this interest rate, this is what it would cost you. I think along the way, we don't want kids to lose the value of money, so to speak. We reap what we sow. If we are consistently always providing everything for our kids, are they able to have the resiliency to wait and not get something immediate and be able to withstand the tough emotional part of not getting what they want? And that's a skill. That's a human skill to have that level of resiliency. And almost no matter someone's resources, and I say that with a little hedging because, the right parents with the right connections can probably get their kids a job. But what's the reality? If those kids don't perform, everyone in the company is going to know, oh, they've got the job because their dad helped them out or their mom helped them out.
I mean, it does come out in the wash eventually, right? I mean, there's only so much you can do. And when a kid gets to a certain age, I mean, it is on them. I think you just want to do your best to give them a bridge to, reaching their own potential. And I loved your opening comment. Would you say that quote again for us?
Smooth seas do not make skilled sailors.
That's really good. The other one that I've attached myself to is prepare your kids for the road. Don't prepare the road for your kids.
Right. Yeah, that's great.
Kind of a similar spirit and maybe a little bit counterintuitive at times. All right. I think we beat that one. All right. This next one, fear of failure from your children's perspective and the dissonance between where they are and where they perceive their high-powered, very successful parent, and just like how almost impossible it might appear to them to become that successful in their lives.
And so for parents who are kind of helping their kids find their path, that fear of failure is a challenge because we're kind of putting failure as a binary state. Either I succeed or I fail, versus us kind of getting it out of the black and white territory of I struggled, I learned something from this, it helped me progress forward. What did I take away? What did I learn for next time? And I think we have to help not only as parents, we've got to help see it that way, but then we have to help our kids see it that way. And again, going back to like a founder, it's the rare person who has just had like all green lights in their life, And it's, more than likely they've had some stumbles and some missteps and some, failures but, what did they learn from that? How did it make them a better person? We tend to remember those things. I mean, it's deep in our DNA to remember the things that don't go well so we don't repeat those things. And in some ways, some of those failures can be a gift for our kids. Now, we certainly don't want them to be, when we have the means, we don't want them to just like, oh, hey, you're, sorry, like you've been expelled from school and now you can't do anything. Like, so we want to safeguard. It's okay to put the guardrails up or the bumpers on the bowling alley up a little bit, but to let them struggle a little bit and to make a team on their own and to have to go and talk to a teacher about a grade or a class that they're struggling in, or to get extra credit going, to give them the tools to do that, I think is helping them along the way. And it's a mindset for our parents. It's a mindset for them to kind of like make that shift and see that there's value in doing that versus that we have to protect our kids at all cost.
What about the storytelling? I mean, I've been making a more concerted effort with my children to talk about some of my failures more openly,
Yes.
whether they happened earlier in my career or more recently. The temptation I always had was I kind of wanted my kids to look up to me. And so I didn't share as much. And I guess some of it's age appropriate, right? I mean, like a 7-year-old doesn't get what an older child can get. But what's interesting is when I talk about my failures, they pay attention to those stories more than my successes. And I've just noticed that recently. And I also liked what you said about absolute performance versus progress. And I've been trying to bring this to our work in terms of like people responding to progress much more productively than absolute performance. How would you apply that, both of these storytelling on the downside, the negative side, and celebrating progress over performance? How does that strike you, and what would you say to a parent about those two topics?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I definitely applaud you for being vulnerable with your kids and transparent at a developmental level. I think that is really healthy. And our kids are, your kids, our kids are going to love us pretty unconditionally. They're not just going to say, "Oh, it's all wins for my dad." And they like hearing those stories because it humanizes us. It shows that the path isn't always easy to tackle and the obstacle can be the way. And it's important for our kids to know that this is the journey that a lot of people take. And so I would highly encourage parents to be somewhat vulnerable and somewhat transparent. And when I have parents in session, basically if you're in the room, then you're part of the session. And so I'll be talking to their child about something, and then I'll turn to the parent and say, "Hey, tell us about a friendship that was difficult for you. Tell us about a friendship that didn't work out the way you hoped. Tell us about a time that someone, you trusted didn't live up to that and didn't deserve that level of trust." And I mean, you're right. I mean, kids they're all ears at that point. And it's also kind of important for our kids to see that we have to, and I don't want it to sound trite, but we do have to enjoy the journey. We are a very outcome focused society, and time is finite. If we're only focused on these outcomes and then once we're there, we're looking at the next big outcome, gosh, we've really just blown through a lot of time that we could have been savoring the ups and the downs and bettering ourselves as people. And I think a lot of founders probably know that inherently. It keeps them going. You're getting excited about the next thing you want to do, and you're working with your team on how that's going to unfold and roll out and whatnot. And so they are enjoying the journey there. And so how do we then have our kids take that same approach? There's an element of reflective work that goes into parenting too, where we're asking open-ended questions and having our kids summarize what's going on. And again, we won't go deep into the biology of that, but every time we kind of pull up a memory or a thought and we reconsolidate that thought, that becomes the new memory for that event. And so as, we're having a child reflect back on their friendship in elementary school or the breakup they just had in high school, we're helping them reconsolidate that. I can't tell you how many high schoolers and college age clients I have that they've gone through this breakup and then, they quickly fall into like, it was all bad. And so we're on the whiteboard basically laying out, what did you like about this person? What do you want to see in your next partner? What are the non-starters for next time that now in hindsight you've learned about yourself?
That's really helpful. Let's apply, and this is a little bit freeform, but let's apply. When you were talking, I was thinking about if Simon Sinek wrote a book about parenting, with the what, the how, and the why, applied, how much of our assessment of our children and the feedback that we give them is around the what, how little attention we're giving to the how, whether it be like a bad outcome or a good one, and really kind of talking about that. And then maybe like at its best, talking to the children about, why we're doing what we're doing and what we see in their why that is remarkable. How would you coach that for a parent, that approach? How would you teach that?
So I love what you just said, first of all, and I would make it reciprocal. So we'd have parents kind of sharing, and then we'd have our kids share. And of course, it's going to be on their developmental level. And we'd want to hear both those voices from both their perspectives. And maybe it's a Venn diagram where we're talking about something family related.
Come on, Keith. I'm not going to have a dry erase board at the dinner table. So,
although I will say a lot of times, one of the things we do talk about is grabbing a piece of paper and putting things out.
Interesting.
And having some, one of the things we do want to do with our kids is have some way to reflect back. So think about someone who is maybe really depressed. When we fall into a state of depression, we can quickly live in the present and think that, thinking back, thinking forward, everything is a dark cloud. Nothing is going to change. And we know that impermanence is a constant. It is going to change. We know that 2 weeks ago, you were actually feeling pretty good. And the likelihood of feeling good 2 weeks from now is really high. And so to have a little bit of a written record on some of these things is actually really valuable. And some of my parents, I do have them, at least for a period of time, have like a whiteboard in the kitchen or a notebook that the family kind of like puts things down, because we want to be able to reflect back on the good work that we're doing and have our kids be able to see that, oh, if we're talking about progress over time, you flip back, and I do this with my clients all the time because I've got a huge whiteboard in my office, which is probably become a joke to some some degree. But at the end of each session, we'll take a picture of the whiteboard. I keep a record, of course, and they take a record. And we can go back and look and see, we'll do like current state, desired state. And now we'll look back at someone that we've worked with for, a number of months, and all of those things in their desired state are now their current state. You passed this class that you wanted, you were able to get a date to prom, you have a job. And now, but we lose that perspective sometimes because we're so, biased to the present. And I actually think it's a great tool for parents to utilize.
I love that. And I use my dry erase board all the time, and I get made fun of as well. So
Good company, perhaps?
kindred spirits in that regard. All right. So we could bundle these next two, I think, Keith, because it really has to do with the extremity in which founders and C-suite executives, particularly those reporting to private equity firms, the extremity of the environment in which they're operating and the pressures under which they're performing and the amount of effort and discomfort those require of them, hour after hour, day after day, month after month, and just the lack of self-care that often goes with that, the empty cup that we feel when we get home. We briefly talked too, when we talked about this, Keith, if you recall, I mentioned that another kind of vulnerable comment I make about myself is I almost felt like my home life owed it to me when I got home to make it like, a retreat or recess or like a soothing place that I deserve somehow. And I'm really ashamed to say it.
Yeah.
But it didn't come from like a narcissistic place. It came from God, I get home and I'm depleted, and I just wish someone would take care of me, like I've been taking care of people all day kind of a thing. My mom struggled with this as a school teacher, 30 years. I can't even imagine that. She had third graders for 30 years and then 3 boys at home. But like, let's switch to you coaching parents, not youth now. And how would you help those of us in that place, and how do we best deal with that? Because we don't want to take our foot off the gas either. Like, that's not an acceptable coaching.
Right.
If I could preface that.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. So, you're in good company with the story you just told. And again, thank you. Thank you for being transparent about that. And I've fallen into the same, of course, we all fall into that. We start to create this mindset and have an expectation of like, gosh, I've just, knocked it out of the park all day long, all week long, all month long. I just want to go home and I think we said in our conversation, live this like Rockwellian, life of like the kids will run up and give us a hug and hot dinner on the table, and then, I can sit by the fireplace for a while. And, that's far from reality. And that, that ultimately comes down to a couple of ingredients. And one of course, is our mindset. And we have to be talking to our partner about that and where we stand, because, being a C-suite executive and a founder is different than being a parent, full-time parent all the time. And if we have the luxury of having one parent at home and that's kind of their principal focus, that doesn't mean that, hey, come 6:00, that's it. We're off the clock for the day. The kids are persistent. And, just a quick little developmental side note, a lot of our teenagers start to become more neurologically activated in early evenings. So you're going to have like a 15, 16, 17-year-old who's all revved up around 9:00 at night as we're like about to slip into a coma.
That's like a biological thing?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. And that's why they've really looked at kind of changing the start time for schools, because one, those teenagers need more sleep, but also they're just more activated a little bit at night.
That's fascinating.
So kind of coming back to the parents, so we've got to work on that mindset, and we have to have open lines of communication with our partner. It's okay to have the expectation that, boy, I need some downtime. And then, but we have to be communicating that, and we're going to ultimately have to schedule that. Just like, again, overlaying the skills of an executive onto being a parent, we're going to have to give our time a job. If we know that, we've got a busy start to the week, maybe we're going to meet out for dinner on Wednesday and we're going to drive separately and have dinner at a nice restaurant, and then I'm going to go play pickleball and then head home. But we have that agreement. The other parent knows what we're doing. It's all planned out. And so we're being very, very overt in what we're doing and planful in what we're doing to safeguard against some of these pieces. We all know at work, but the same holds true for home. When our resiliency is like that, the proverbial cup that is getting close to the lip and about to overflow. And so we call that like our window of tolerance. How much more can I handle? And so as the adult parent, we've got to be pretty consistently evaluating how much more resiliency do I have? What is one going to give me more room in my cup? And two, how much room do I have to kind of then give? And so on the proactive side, and you talked about this, founders and C-suite executives maybe not taking care of themselves. Ideally, as a parent, we're modeling a lot of that behavior for our kids. How do we find balance? And it doesn't need to be tremendous. It's like James Clear and Atomic Habits. Are we taking a vote towards being the person we want to be? So if I want to kind of get my health under control, can the family go for a walk after dinner around the block or take the dog up the street? That's moving in the direction of the person I want to be. And now we're kind of stacking a couple of things together. I'm stacking some health with some family time, all in that 15-minute, 20-minute walk. And that's a really healthy way to approach it. When high performers can lean into a little bit of maybe that all or nothing mentality, like, hey, if I'm going to work out, I'm going to do a triathlon. And, it's that drive that has gotten them to where they're at. But can they temper that? Can we dial that way back and find just a foothold on some of these pieces? Because it makes a big difference. We know slight changes in 15 minutes of extra sleep can improve your cognition by about 10 or 15 points.
Yeah, and I like that dosing of self-care thing. One of my colleagues likes to play the guitar, and he finds great joy in that. And he started to just go play for 15, 20 minutes. And, he's a better parent, better husband, and so forth with just that little bit. And I guess what I'm also hearing you say is take responsibility for it and then don't play the victim thing. Cause I think that's super easy. For all of my type A in me, I still find myself blaming, the aspirations of everyone around me for me being drained. It's not their fault. But it's easy to kind of, we call it laying on the cross is one expression I've heard. And I tend to do that, but I guess if you're trying to be a good parent, then try to be prepared to do that and don't just show up unprepared. And being prepared in this instance, as you're saying, is take the time to take care of yourself so you can take care of your family.
Absolutely. And then I would say, give our time a job. I remember I had to work. I was so used to having people come to me with inane requests that I was like, no, we're not doing that. Nope. Here's the reason why, quickly analyzing it and nope, we're not. And I had to purposely kind of say yes to my kids, even though I was like, I'm not so sure this is a good idea. And I remember when they were young, particularly 5 and 7 and hey, we're going to do this. And I'm I kind of made it a point, if it was safe, or safe enough, I was like, okay, let's do it. But then I would have them do it with me and I would make them follow through to completion to kind of work those executive skills. I remember they wanted to get bows and arrows, and we set something up at the back. We got hay bales and put them in the back of the garage and made a safe distance. But I had them come with me to get the hay bales and set them all up. And then when it was time and they didn't want to do it anymore, hey, we're taking these all down. And so it's just, it's being purposeful. And I've used that word a lot, but I think it is true because to your point earlier, we sometimes come home and we're just so drained and our mindset is that I just want to be left alone. And if that's the case, then we probably should put ourselves in a position so we can be alone. We probably need to stop and go for a hike, or we probably need to go to a friend's house and chill out for a little bit, or we need to talk to our partner and let them know that, hey, I'm going to come in and head down to this room for a little bit to play guitar and relax before I come back up. And it's just having that line of communication and setting that as a priority that's going to put us in a better spot. It's when we have the expectation of having downtime and then we walk in and there's a school project that needs to be done.
I'm kind of struck too. I mean, in several of these buckets, you've talked about the communication that you have with your partner, co-parent, or, whatever that may be in your life. And I'm struck by an implicit point I think you're making, which is sometimes the quality of your parenting is proportionate to the quality of your partnership with your loved one. And maybe a hack of sorts to becoming a better parent is having a better partnership with your partner.
Yes, absolutely.
I haven't thought of that. Probably should have, but interesting to me.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's definitely not a should, but it's something that I think, escapes a lot of us because we tend to, we love the person that we're with for the most part, all the time.
One would assume.
Yes. And, so therefore we think we're like-minded and that we've got this kind of like intimate, innate connection that is just like, okay, he or she probably knows, or they know that, this is where I'm at and they'll safeguard against that. But if we're really not openly communicating, particularly as the kids get older, I would say, I just had this conversation with a coworker the other day. Most people think the parenting challenge comes at like the elementary and middle school years. And I would make a strong argument that high school and college is just as challenging. Bigger kids, bigger problems, and you have to be present. You've got to be able to kind of like, and this is where you're getting into such a deeper cognitive approach. And probably most founders are going to feel comfortable here because they're going to be able to use like their intellectual gymnastics to like help their kids versus when they're younger, it's like you're playing like on the floor with trucks and stuff. But having that open line of communication is safeguarding because now you're not walking. It'd be the equivalent of walking into a meeting and getting completely different results from what you thought you were going to get. Someone, they pull up the spreadsheet and like the numbers are vastly different than what we thought a second before we walked in. So if we know, hey, they're going to this practice and they've got this birthday party and we've got this school project, they're sick and need to go to the doctor. If we have that information in advance, now we can start to buffer ourselves and kind of prepare for what we're coming into versus walking in with a mindset of an expectation of doing something enjoyable only to be thwarted and have to dive into something unenjoyable.
That's good. We didn't have this on our list, but I'm going to just broadly characterize this last topic about the word regret. And working with other executives and founders, I hear a version of, in a solemn, sober moment, maybe they're now more successful, but it sounds something like, man, I wish I would have been a better parent when my kids were like really little. And sometimes it even becomes such a big regret that they might say something like, I was just a terrible parent. Or maybe worse, I am a terrible parent. They may not say it like that, but you can kind of see it, in the way they talk about their roles as parents. And it's like they're kind of a victim of their success. And what would you say to somebody who might legitimately have not delivered at home, and maybe their kids are older now and maybe even out of the house, in its most extreme case? What would you say to somebody who has those regrets, and how do you give them an inspiration to take another crack at it or whatever? Like what does that sound like?
Yeah. So it's never too late to try and reconnect on a relationship and try and repair and restore relationships. And that's true for our kids. It's true for other loved ones. It's true for friends. And, a couple of things that, as you're saying that, strike me as one, we're always physically in the present, but mentally we can go backwards. Mentally we can go forwards. Like if we're thinking kind of negatively about the past, we can kind of slip into more depression and depressive ideas. If we're thinking more negatively into the future, it can drive a little more anxious thinking. And so when we want to connect back to those and think, okay, what do I want to do differently? And so we want to make sure that we're coaching ourselves up versus just criticizing ourselves. So I think step one is to make sure that we don't just fall into, like you said earlier, like that victim stance and just criticizing ourselves and hammering ourselves and just beating ourselves up, because that's not going to bear much fruit on trying to repair the relationship. Really, we've got to get to the point of like, okay, I made some mistakes. I had some missteps. I did not live up to the standard that I was holding for myself. What do I need to do differently? What do I learn from that experience? Then we take that knowledge and then we start to overlay it in kind of those circles of influence. What's in my control, what's in my influence, and what's out of my control. And you had spoken earlier about being vulnerable and transparent. And the older our kids are, the more vulnerable and transparent we're going to have to be, particularly if we're trying to kind of reboot and repair to a certain degree. We can't go to a 23-year-old kid and be like, trying to soft pedal it and make excuses for what happened in the past. Then it's not in our control in all of these situations if they come back to us or not. But we can certainly, in our control is sharing what we learned, sharing the kind of relationship we want to have, sharing what we're committing to doing to make that happen. And hopefully that is influencing them to come back in and give us another try. And then we see where it goes. And sometimes we don't always have success right out of the gate. And we've got to come back around and take it from a different angle. And that's okay. It's okay to let someone who maybe has been hurt or has grown apart, just because we're ready to make that reconnection, it doesn't mean that they're ready to make that reconnection. And so they might need time to just process what we're talking to them about. And this is where I would encourage, and I've worked with parents in this situation, this is where I would maybe encourage a letter versus a phone call. And it gives the person a chance, and it's really, old school, but it gives the person a chance to really process what we're saying. It's also a very thoughtful process on the parenting side. We're able to kind of dial in and hone that letter to really be reflective of what we're feeling and what we've learned and what we want to do differently. It gives the child a chance to process and not feel compelled to talk in the moment. Where a text or a phone call has a certain sense of immediacy, we don't want the child to fall into an old pattern and just have an emotional response that, maybe isn't indicative of where they might get to if they have a chance to kind of think through things.
Yeah, as I'm hearing you too, it comes to my mind too, is like if you're going to have this catalytic moment, kind of a reboot, Control Alt Delete back in the old days, it may be as important to the proper delivery of that and as it is making a decision that it also is going to require some behavioral changes of yourself after. Because if you create this dramatic moment of reentry and acceptance and apology maybe, or whatever it is, but it's a one-hit wonder, it might cause more harm than good. So I'm wondering out loud here, like, if you're going to go there, what's the mindset that we should have?
Yes, absolutely. And you're going to, like you're saying, you have to be committed to your own change. And you only get so many attempts. And some people get more attempts than others. And we just don't really know how many chances our kids will give us. More often than not, they are open to giving us more chances. But there probably is, we could be treading on thin ice at some point if we continually make the same mistakes. And so that our own growth is critical in being a good parent.
Thank you, Keith. I also, in this particular instance, I was sharing this poem that I recently discovered with this parent who was regretful of the way they showed up as a parent. And I'll just read it real quick because it's really touching. And it's really about like forgiving yourself, and that's maybe step one.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's by a fellow by the name of John O'Donohue, and it reads, quote, "May all that is unforgiven in you be released. May your fears yield their deepest tranquilities. May all that is unlived in you blossom into a future graced with love." It strikes me because it's like to me, it's a poem about like renewal in the face of regret, or maybe holding on to your shame from the past and letting it go so that you can live a more loving future. And so
that's beautiful. And just to tack onto that poem, I think when we have a touch point, whether it's a song or a poem or a journal entry that we've created, it can really help drive our own personal change because it's resonating with us at an emotional level.
Yeah, I'm tempted to share this with my kids, by the way.
Yeah, no,
As we're
it'd be
talking
great.
about it. But anyway, Keith, thanks for all this wisdom. Anything that we didn't touch on that you maybe had in your notes or you think is an important message to successful, quote unquote, successful parents out there?
Yeah, no, I think we've covered the big pieces that I wanted to kind of hit. I would encourage people though to do some deeper dives if we're finding that we're kind of coming up against an obstacle. A lot of what I said was very surface level, and you can dig deep into a lot of those concepts, and they really do help. I've said this all along to my clients and my own family. A lot of this really works well. It's just a matter of time. It doesn't happen as quickly as we would like. It's not like we put this in place and within a week it's success. I mean, it can be an extended period, but it does really work well. I remember my son now, who just turned 22, when he was like 8 years old, there was a book to kind of help with some of that emotional regulation. It was called The Social Detective. And the social detective would say, is your behavior in the environment expected or unexpected? And it wasn't too long ago, he was talking about something and he goes, Dad, it was expected behavior. And so, here we are like, eons away from when that conversation took place, and he's referencing it. So I thought, okay, that's a win. That's pretty good.
Yeah, 12, 15 years later, overnight success. Yeah, well, Keith, thank you for that story. And I mean, just on a personal level, I got to interview Edward Norton on this podcast, and I was like so nervous, and it was I felt so cool, But this has been enormously fulfilling for me, and I was really looking forward to this. And no offense, Edward, but Keith Sousa's got something on you.
Oh gosh, yeah, boy. Well, I have to thank you, Ryan. This was a real pleasure. I really enjoyed this. I enjoyed our other conversation and this conversation. So thank you. I appreciate it.
And how do parents, if there's anyone that is listening, may want to talk to you about their particular flavor of challenge, is there a way that they can get in touch with you, Keith?
Yeah, child and adolescent behavioral supports that can be Googled. Our phone number is 303 660 5397, or you can email info@cabsupports.com. We've got 12 different therapists. 3 of us are co-owners, and we have availability. We're usually running close to capacity, but there's always room.
I'll just tell Keith you listen to the Founder's Journey podcast. I'm sure he'll get you in. And
yes, I would. That would be great. I would love that.
No discounts. Anyway, Keith, thank you for the work that you do at a whole nother level. Obviously our communities will thrive if our children thrive. And thank you for investing your entire career towards the development of our future. It's very meaningful work. And on behalf of all of us, thank you very much for what you do.
I appreciate that. Thank you.